I once believed my life followed a typical pattern: family responsibilities, steady hobbies, and a reliable job. Until an extraordinary chain of events shifted my entire outlook. In my younger years, I spent most of my free time riding motorcycles. The thrill of the wind against my face was enough to make me feel alive, and the powerful roar of the engine drowned out everyday worries. While not zooming around on my bike, I worked in a technology business I owned alongside my sibling. We tackled computer repair requests and software troubleshooting. My 2 children were my world. Despite all the complexities and challenges of parenthood, I cherished every moment with them. Looking back, I recognized there was a time when I thought everything was predictable, almost on autopilot. My routine was straightforward. I balanced my computer services with time on the road, built a life I felt comfortable in, and rarely stopped to reflect on how fragile existence can be. The turning point came one evening, right after a festive occasion that had people gathered in bars and in roadside spots. This night, however, was unlike anything I ever anticipated. While heading home, well past midnight, I chose my usual route along a parkway. It was quiet and traffic seemed thin enough for me to merge effortlessly between lanes on my motorcycle. In the corner of my vision, I noticed a pickup truck moving uncomfortably near me. Something about the driver's position struck me as wrong. In that split second, I realized he was driving the opposite direction in his lane, essentially heading north while in the southbound side. Before I could even process a how-to strategy for a safe escape, the protective guardrail vanished between our lanes. Fear crashed over me. If the driver suddenly recognized his mistake, he might steer directly into me. I swiftly guided my motorcycle across several lanes, hoping to steer clear of him. At that exact instant, that pickup vanished beneath an overpass, colliding head-on with a limousine. The impact cost a child's life and claimed the chauffeur as well. I recall the overwhelming panic gripping me. It was so surreal that I initially froze, wanting to help or intervene, yet others rushed to the scene before I could decide. I recognized there was nothing immediate I could do. Emergency response was already in action. I rode home, my mind reeling with shock, and tried to sleep, though nightmares scarcely allowed me rest. The next day, I discovered the harrowing image on the front page of a newspaper. A plea for witnesses included. My gut told me the facts were obvious. The driver was reportedly under the influence, and the evidence seemed indisputable. I chose not to come forward. Time passed normally for about a year until I saw a news story about a trial underway. The pickup driver faced homicide charges, and I realized it was my obligation to testify about what I had witnessed that tragic night. Although it felt daunting, I stepped forward, hoping truth would serve justice. Inside the courtroom, I saw a young man who, under different circumstances, could easily have been me or someone I knew in another lifetime. Over 2 days, I provided my testimony, transforming a complicated case for the prosecution. The result was a verdict carrying a prison sentence of 16 years, long enough to feel unyielding. My heart ached for the grieving parents who seemed disappointed that 16 years was the limit of the penalty. In that whirlwind, I reminded myself that youth often comes with rash decisions. No matter how guilty or irresponsible the offender might have been, the entire situation was heartbreaking for all involved. That trial planted a seed of change in me, and the usual framework of my life no longer felt right. In tutorial fashion, I started reevaluating my priorities, best practices to optimize more responsibility, how to let go of negativity, and step-by-step methods to realign my ambitions. I sold my share of the tech business to my brother and decided it was best to pour my energy into fatherhood. I wanted to witness every milestone my children reached, embracing each first word, each new dream, and each creative spark. Those months of focusing on parenting ignited another passion: community engagement. I ran for a local school board position, fueling behind-the-scenes efforts for educational improvements in my hometown. I also led the push to clean up a contaminated site in the area, convinced that expert tips for environmental responsibility revolutionize small towns. Surprising even myself, life became both purposeful and fulfilling. On weekends, I still relished climbing onto my newest Harley-Davidson and gliding across scenic roads, often heading out to a humble roadside barbecue spot. That was a type of personal tradition. I'd ride long stretches, enjoy slow-cooked snacks, then return home feeling content. One hot afternoon, while coming back from one such barbecue outing, traffic stood nearly still. Cars had been backing up for miles, possibly due to construction or a different highway mishap. In the stifling heat, several drivers had already inched over to the road's shoulder, hoping to turn off. Eventually, I followed the same plan, planning to make a right-hand turn at an upcoming intersection. However, at that precise moment, a break in the oncoming lane let a large truck attempt to turn left, leading it to slam right into me. My world went black in an instant, with no warning and no means of prevention. When I regained a semblance of consciousness, I was sprawled on the pavement, aware that time had slipped away. Flashing lights flickered around me, hinting that emergency crews had responded. The medics demanded I remain still, but my instincts prompted me to sit up. A jab of unmoving bone in my leg reaffirmed the seriousness of my injuries, and I slumped back to the ground, breathless from agony. Then it felt like my spirit detached. Lifted above the scene, I soared through clouds, rising higher, uncertain what it all meant, until eventually we descended, revealing an aerial view of a hospital below, a large circular building that I soon recognized as a major trauma center. Once we landed, paramedics unstrapped me and rushed me indoors, though my memory blurred at that point. Everything went hazy, as if my consciousness had traveled to another realm. I had sustained multiple fractures, a spinal injury, severe internal bleeding, and a major blow to the head. By all conventional measures, I should not have survived. A doctor later remarked that my injuries resembled what one sees in autopsies, indicating the odds were stacked against me. Yet while doctors stabilized my condition in the physical world, hooking me to life support machinery, my sense of self was no longer tethered to that hospital bed. I found myself in a vast, luminescent domain, a place I describe as the space between here and somewhere else. It felt as though I wandered there for lifetimes. Conventional time was irrelevant. Events flowed without sunrise or sunset. My experiences guided the progression of time, each revelation making me feel as if hours, days, or entire years had passed. The earliest environment I perceived was reminiscent of a typical work setting like the back office of a technology firm, only the tasks I performed were not purely about fixing software or gadgets. They seemed to resonate with deeper layers, teaching me how every material action has a spiritual parallel. At first, I had no conscious notion that the realm was different. Over time, I gleaned that I was in a transitional dimension, somewhat like purgatory in certain belief systems, where the spirit undergoes lessons before finding its next path. Nobody handed me a step-by-step manual explaining how to succeed in spiritual transformation. Instead, I'd confront puzzling situations and decode them on my own. One recurrent episode involved encountering someone I recognized from my earthly life, yet he appeared to keep changing age, gender, or physical traits. Eventually, I learned to perceive his core essence, what I would call a spiritual fingerprint. I realized that beyond any outward disguises, there lay an inner presence unique to each living entity, and that presence remains interconnected with everything else in existence. This revelation opened my eyes. I sensed countless spiritual energies in trees, stones, cosmic bodies, even entire galaxies. All these energies were distinct yet linked like threads in an infinite tapestry. The universe and its ultimate creator were woven of the same cloth, forging a unity that now felt perfectly logical. An even more transcendent tutorial arrived when I underwent repeated life reviews, a behind-the-scenes look at every moment I had lived, from childhood mishaps to pivotal adult decisions. In these experiences, I was not merely rewatching scenes, I felt immersed in them, absorbing everyone's perspectives at once. I discovered that we often act with incomplete understanding, missing how events affect other participants who are entangled in our story. The more my comprehension expanded, the more thoroughly I grasped the significance of each encounter. Each time I integrated new lessons, I'd do the review again from a higher vantage point, as if rereading the ultimate guide to my own life. Though confronting traumatic or painful memories felt excruciating, I experienced an overwhelming sense of relief afterward, a kind of euphoria that came with fully letting go. It was like releasing anchors of regret or resentment that had weighed me down. Eventually, I passed into another scenario, resembling a restaurant where I oversaw several adolescents, instructing them on how business operations worked. No matter what strategies I tested, step-by-step instructions, group projects, positive reinforcement, none of it clicked with them. I reached my breaking point, deeply frustrated. A quiet woman sat praying nearby, generating a palpable energy of peace. I couldn't hear her words, but her gentle aura offered me reassurance. It was as if the love in her prayers formed a channel for compassion. When I finally sought guidance from the owner of that restaurant, a powerful wave of recognition crashed over me. I realized that I was face to face with my higher self, the essence of who I was beyond my physical incarnation. Somehow, all the knowledge I'd accumulated in the realm came rushing back, and I understood the young employees were not misbehaving kids, but spirits poised for their first journey into a human body. My job was to mentor them, bridging training from an ethereal vantage point. I suspected my diligence here determined whether I stayed in the spiritual plane or returned to my injured form still clinging to life on Earth. The third phase brought me to a beloved local hangout from my hometown. Every evening, folks gathered at a scenic overlook to watch the sun fade, chatting about daily happenings and gossiping over coffee or beverages of choice. There I encountered two companions from childhood. At first, everything felt delightfully ordinary, but eventually it struck me they had passed away months before my accident. Anxiety tightened its grip on me, and I wrestled daily with the question of how they could be there. I hesitated to ask, fearful of the answer. My unease skyrocketed until one day, brimming with desperation, I demanded to know why we were all together. Their response was straightforward. They were there to ensure I'd be okay. I still hadn't retained the memory that I was intubated in the hospital, that this entire scenario was a dimension bridging physical life and spiritual awakening. When the next radiant sunset grew so blinding I had to shield my eyes, I sensed the intense whiteness receding after several moments. When my vision cleared, I was back in the hospital room. My mother's hands clasped mine, telling me I'd survive, though battered, and the worst might now be behind me. Readjusting to an earthly world was not like waking from a nap. Even after regaining awareness, I felt tethered to that unearthly reality. Reintegrating piece by piece, I began to realize that the woman offering silent prayers in that spiritual restaurant was someone dear to me in the physical world. I had known her for many years, from volunteer school projects to local hikes. In the hospital, as soon as doctors removed the tubes, I texted her, desperate to share that I'd felt her prayers in that mystical domain. When she visited, we seldom spoke of profound mysteries. Often we just walked or did simple physical therapy tasks. Over time, my gratitude for her unwavering presence blossomed into something deeper, feelings of more intimate affection and love. Reflecting on the ultimate guide to emotional healing, it was clear the synergy of her support and my spiritual glimpses had anchored my recovery. One day, however, life hurled another tragedy at me. An event so sudden and devastating that no how-to or step-by-step method could have prepared me. I discovered my grown child in the basement, lifeless from an overdose. The shock was impossible to grasp. This was a bright, promising individual with a future brimming with potential, now gone in a blink. I asked myself how I, with all my expansions in empathy and perspective, had somehow failed my child. Seeking to piece the puzzle together, a relative visited a medium on a separate matter, only for the medium to mention a spirit name with the same name as my late child. Flowers apparently accompanied this message, specifically roses. Oddly enough, I'd stumbled upon roses in strange places. A bloom on a hiking path in the dead of winter, a single rose on a familiar street corner. My friend who prayed for me believed those roses were signals that a bridge existed between my child's spirit and us. At first, I scoffed. I refused to believe a stranger could contact him or that these coincidences pointed to actual communication. Nonetheless, the medium asserted a link involving Saint Teresa, an association with roses, and a significant alignment of dates that matched my child's birthday and date of passing. The next moment, my departed child came to me in a dream, radiating calm reassurance, as though echoing the same placid acceptance I felt during my near-death journey. It struck me that maybe this intangible dimension, the place between life and afterlife, had also embraced my child. Amid crippling grief, circumstances forced me into yet another legal proceeding. The person accused of selling lethal substances to my child was charged with the same second-degree homicide count I'd seen in the earlier trial. Down to the possible prison sentence, the parallels were haunting. Initially, I prepared to let rage lead me, fervently wanting the offender to experience the full force of my pain. But standing in that courtroom, I saw someone heartbreakingly young, seemingly lost as well, and once again recognized how life can twist good people into horrifying corners. Any thirst for vengeance evaporated, replaced by empathy. I wanted him to discover a better path to break free from darkness, the repeated patterns. Hinted that everything was connected, perhaps orchestrated in ways I can't fully articulate, but can feel, guiding me underneath the surface of worldly chaos. In hindsight, I'm convinced that each tragedy also served as a form of spiritual tutoring, showing me the next phase in my personal healing. There's a behind-the-scenes design in how events unfold, an interwoven tapestry that might appear random, yet is intricately planned to elevate our understanding. Eventually, I realized the greatest gift I'd received was the near-death experience itself. It gave me a vantage point to appreciate life's delicate tapestry and find enough love in my heart to break down bitterness. If there's one ultimate guide I'd share with others, it's that existence remains a gift, and we're all far more interlaced than we think. Yes, harsh moments can overpower us with sorrow, but the capacity for human connection, whether bridging realms through prayer or quiet expansions of our hearts after incomprehensible sorrow, has a magic that endures. Learning how to uncover our own capacity for compassion can involve unpredictable steps, but I promise it's a journey worth taking. Keep an eye out for small miracles, like a rose in the dead of winter, or the random stranger who steps up to help. Seek mentors or spiritual teachers if you need a tutorial for guiding your soul's evolution. Explore best practices to maintain emotional resilience, test viral hacks for stress relief, or examine the latest trends in wellness. Whatever method resonates with you, trust that there's a step-by-step path, a top 10 strategies list to reawaken your sense of unity with others, a behind-the-scenes perspective that highlights the potential for hope even in the worst disasters. For me, there's an overwhelming sense that all these puzzle pieces, witnessing that horrific collision, testifying in a difficult trial, losing everything in a brutal motorcycle collision, bonding with a friend who prayed me through a coma, and saying goodbye to my child, came together for reasons that defy typical, logical explanation. Perhaps they were planned, or maybe what we call fate is simply a chain of illusions, weaving real meaning. Regardless, the personal transformation I underwent led me to a fullness of heart I never knew before. Sadness remains, but the sadness coexists with a deeper acceptance. If you need an easy method to shift from despair to growth, tap into love, forgiveness, and the unwavering knowledge that we can find light on the other side of devastation. In that place beyond heartbreak, there's a grand awareness that life is precious, and people are inherently capable of goodness. Even if your perspective is shaped by near-death experiences or everyday hardships, the steps toward peace involve embracing each moment as it arrives, and when you do, you might find that the entire universe stands ready to guide you toward wholeness and love. So, in the end, let life be your teacher. Stay open to immediate lessons and glimpses of eternity. Remain curious about how subtle signs, like certain flowers or repeated patterns, might be messages bridging worlds. Know that every sorrow shapes you, every spirit connection redefines your understanding of reality, and every day can be a step toward healing. That is the heart of my story, and I share it with sincerity, hoping someone out there discovers their own spark of hope in these words. Embrace your journey fully, trusting that compassion is never wasted. Pain can metamorphose into wisdom, and transcendent love unites every corner of existence.